Hello friends, for today's video I wanted to go through a list of some adult fantasy books with actual adult characters. In order for books to qualify to be on this list, they can't just have adult characters that exist within the story in some capacity. They actually have to either be prominent characters with their own perspectives, or they have to be the main perspective of the story. The reason that I like to try and highlight books like this from time to time is because obviously within the young adult age range, the point is to center young people's experiences, which I think is a great thing. By no means in highlighting books with adult characters am I trying to say that these are better than books that center young people's experiences. Rather, I think that it's important for all sorts of different experiences to have the opportunity to have the center stage within stories. And so if in young adult books we're getting a lot of young people's perspectives, and then in adult fantasy we're also getting a lot of young people's perspectives through the coming of age framework. For example, we have Memory Star of Thorn, Mercedes Lackey's Arrows of the Queen, Farseer by Robin Hobb. We have time and time again that blueprint, and it can sometimes feel like, that's great, but where are the books with the adult characters? And so that's why I wanted to shed some light on these. I have done this same style of video a number of times in the past, so if you're looking for more recommendations after today, I'll have my previous videos in the description bar. And also if you have your own recommendations, feel free to leave them, because I think if somebody's clicking on this, they're obviously looking for recommendations. It'd be great if not just my own are available to them, but yours as well. And on that note, we'll finally go ahead and jump into it. I am going to focus on the aspects of these stories that actually pertain to the adult characters, so I might not go as in-depth with the synopsis or the pacing or all these other components that of course make up these stories, but rather I want to specifically stick to the way in which they utilize adult characters within them. And the first book for today would be Perdido Street Station. If you have never picked up Perdido Street Station, just know you're in for an interesting time. The setup for Perdido Street Station, very basic setup, is that you have this very grimy, disgusting city metropolis where you have all these different threads of all of these different characters' lives coming together, and the main one you could argue would be the character of Isaac. Isaac is somebody who is obsessed with his research. He is a scientist, and I already like that he's a scientist because I feel like we don't get that many scientist characters within our fantasy stories, but he is somebody who specifically is obsessed with his research around what he considers to be crisis theory, which is this idea of having something in crisis. Like there is this moment that we're about to shift. So for example, when you have metamorphosis, when you have something that's going to be going from a cocoon into finally turning into something different, you know, this transformation, that moment in between, he's very, very sucked into that concept. And as you could guess, as a result, that means he is very invested in his work. He does have a partner in the story. He has somebody who he has a romantic relationship with, and that person also is an adult. They're also a bug human. That's an example of the weirdness. But regardless, this individual, she's very passionate about her work. She's somebody who is an artist. And what I really liked about their characters and also their dynamic is that they are individuals that have their own passions. Their passions are through their work. And then they try to find time to see each other, be able to support each other, be invested in what the other person's excited about, while also still trying to find time for the things that they care about. And it was oddly, even though it's a guy and a bug lady, one of the most realistic relationships I've seen in a fantasy story between an established couple. And really, if you've read the book, you know why that's so odd. The point is, this is not a story that is focused on their beautiful romance or anything like that. They just happen to be human beings that exist within this city. And I think that oddly made the city itself, which feels like its own character, but it made the city itself feel that much more realistic, because so often in stories, whether they're young adult or adult, there can be this sense of the characters are not beholden to society in any capacity. They're able to just drop everything and go on these adventures, or they have nobody depending on them, or they have nobody really that matters in their life, unless that person is comatose and they're trying to rescue them from the state or something. But it's just like it just feels like nobody ever has somebody else that they're considering, or they don't have their own hobbies or their own interests. And these characters do. And Isaac also feels like an adult. He has people that are his friends. He has people that he speaks to about politics and argues with. And he has views about how the city should be. And he finds his old professor respectable, but also pompous and annoying. And he just feels like an opinionated human being. And as far as, again, if you don't know anything about Perdido Street Station, it is like fantasy, steampunk, horror all meshed into one. And it's like if you took the creativity and whimsy of Final Fantasy and then you made it gross. That's Perdido Street Station. After that, we have one of my favorite books that I've picked up this year, and that would be Children of Gods and Fighting Men. The two main characters of this story, each who have their own perspectives, are both adult women, and it is a historical fantasy story, so you are seeing the ways in which society kind of keeps them held into a certain place with only certain levels of agency, given the fact that they are women. It is specifically looking at Ireland, historical fiction Ireland. And the fantasy components come into the picture through the ways that they have access to magic of sorts. They feel very witch-like in a lot of ways. One of them is an awful human being, and she is mainly concerned with maintaining whatever grasp on power she has, but also being able to take that and give it to her son. So she's looking out for pretty much hers, and that's it. She doesn't care about anybody else. She doesn't care about anything else. Whatever is pertinent to her and her son, that's the only thing that has her attention, and she will trample over whoever gets in her way. The other character is somebody who is grieving, and this is the part I feel like especially is very different from what you've seen in a lot of other stories. She's specifically grieving the loss of her child. And so she's somebody who, when you're first meeting her, she really just wants to live a life, honestly, of isolation. She really doesn't want to be that involved with other people within her. Again, they're kind of witch-like. I don't want to say too much else because that's part of the fun of discovery within the story. If you are interested in hearing more about this one, I did do an in-depth review, so you can hear more about how the magic works in the story. But she doesn't really want to associate that much with the other people that are somewhat magical like her. And she cares about her sister, but her sister has kind of forged her own path that doesn't necessarily allow for the two of them to be in each other's lives much at this point. She just doesn't care anymore. That feeling of you just feel so numb to the rest of society, the rest of the world, and you care, but it's like this tangential care where you're like, I care about it in the abstract, but as far as asking for me to push through this grief in order to be more involved, it's, I don't know, I don't care. She just has this numbness to her. But she is tasked with trying to basically spy on humans for the rest of the people in her group and fill them in on what's been going on. And she is somebody who's a healer. She's very compassionate. She also has a lot of opinions, which isn't necessarily usually the right mix for this time with women who have no status. But it does catch the attention of somebody who finds themselves consistently coming back to her for more information. They want to know more about healing. They seem like they genuinely want to do good with the power that they hold. And she's kind of trying to stay out of the way and also gain information from this person. And just in general, watching the way that these two different perspectives function. They are two very different people, but they both have some kind of relationship to power or relationship to people in power. They also are both mothers, and just seeing how different they are, how differently they function, how differently they lead their lives within this society that is very, very morally gray, I found absolutely fascinating. It's amazing. I think that this book is exceptional. I was so, from the beginning, locked in to their stories. Highly, highly, highly recommend. Next up, we have a new fantasy release. I have either just recently spoken about this in a recent new fantasy releases wrap-up, or that will be coming out soon if you want to hear more in-depth thoughts. But the book itself would be Hemlock and Silver, and the main character in this story is somebody who I'm pretty sure she described herself at one point as middle-aged, and then I think later she's like in her 30s, and I was like, excuse me. But either way, she is this once again, kind of similar to what I was talking about with Perdido Street Station, she is somebody who has a genuine passion for the work that she does. And the work that she does involves trying to understand poisons and come up with antidotes and cures for said poisons. She's very invested in this. She's been invested in this since the time she was young. She's very capable. She's very good at it. However, she has caught the attention of a king who believes that their daughter has been poisoned, and they want her to try and figure out what's been going on, what specifically is the poison that's being used, and also they want her to now save their daughter. And she is somebody who, she just kind of wants everybody to leave her alone so she can do her work. And she's gotten very used to being in her ways, and she doesn't really like being disrupted. She doesn't really like being called upon. She especially doesn't like being called upon by powerful people because she knows that that can put a target on her back. And I just really liked the way that, as far as the way that her being an adult character plays into the story. She knows what she likes in her life. She's kind of figured out, here's what I tried, here's what I learned, here's what didn't work, and here's the experiences I've had, and can everybody just leave me alone? I just want to do my work. That's it. Just leave me alone so I can do my work, please. And she's a little quirky. She's a little different from the rest of society. And I definitely think that that feeling of being, it's not the not like other girls. It's not that in the way that we typically think of it. But that feeling of being a little bit different from everybody else, having an interest that isn't really seen as respectable, or being a little unique in your interests, you know, that sort of thing. I feel like we see that more so in young adult works, or we see it in stories that are centering young people, that feeling of like, I feel apart from a lot of other individuals. But that doesn't necessarily go away as you get older, especially if your interests are more niche, or if they're not seen as acceptable. And so to have that with an adult character in a story, I really, really enjoyed, because as much as we all, as book fans, I think have this sense of community here, and also certainly books have become more popular, and specifically fantasy has become much more popular. I'm sure many of us remember a time where it felt like nobody else in our life was a reader, or nobody else in our life was into fantasy, or whatever. It doesn't have to even be this thing that a lot of us have in common. It could be something else, where it just feels like, oh, nobody else is interested in the things that I'm interested in. And when you start talking about it, and you start talking about those things passionately, it feels like people are just indulging you, and they're kind of like, okay, and nobody else really cares, and you're like, oh man, this is why I just keep to myself. And I think that was very present with the character in Hemlock and Silver. But you as the reader, you're like, I care. I like when people are passionate about things. I wish you would talk about it more. So I definitely found I was endeared to the character in Hemlock and Silver for those reasons. After that, we have an Alchemy of Masques and Mirrors. This is a multiple perspective story. It's kind of steampunk high fantasy. I don't know if I'd go as far as say it's steampunk epic fantasy, but it certainly is bigger in its world building and its stakes. And one of the perspectives is a younger woman, but the other perspective is somebody who very much has a paternal role in her life. They're kind of like the bodyguard father figure, and he has a perspective. He's also kind of like the swashbuckling sky pirate type. And I do have a soft spot for that type of character. I also have a soft spot for any kind of, it can be literal blood relation, paternal or maternal, or just some kind of protective figure and a young person. I do have a soft spot for that. And an Alchemy of Masques and Mirrors, this is one that I won't be continuing on with the series because it didn't quite work for me, but there was nothing about it that I found upsetting or off-putting. I just wasn't as fully invested, but there were a lot of pieces of the story to really like. I felt like the world building was really cool. As noted, I liked the relationship between these two characters, and then also I felt like the way that the plot unfolded was always engaging and fun. But when it comes to the adult character, I just feel like a lot of times when we talk about adult characters, we often kind of can't resist thinking of parents. And I think that found family can also exist, of course, with characters that aren't literal mother and child or father and child. It can be somebody who has found themselves in the role of being some kind of parent-like figure. I really appreciate stories that have that, because you never know, maybe a person in your life you find like you're a godparent to a young person, or maybe you're a teacher, or maybe you are just an aunt or uncle who's really close to these young people in your life. And maybe you just have a care and compassion for young people in your community. And I just feel like because we often think of them in association to parents, we don't always get to see when the characters aren't necessarily blood related, and I really appreciated that about this perspective. And then last for today, we have A River Enchanted. There are some characters in this that are on the younger side and are more so how you would typically think of characters that are in new adult, young adult, or maybe even certain pockets of adult fantasy where they're still younger individuals. But you do have a perspective, you actually have two, that are just a little bit older. And I definitely think that how their perspective is written and also how their plot lines play out feel really gutting if you are somebody who has experienced anything even remotely similar to what they're going through. So with those characters in particular, one of them is a widow. His wife died and he is now a father to a young girl. He did remarry, and him and his wife get along. They respect each other. They even seem like there is at least some form of care and maybe even love, but it maybe isn't necessarily exactly like you would imagine from two characters who fell in love and got married as a result. It kind of seems like a partnership, a companionship. This has a hint of a historical fiction feeling to it. So there's also that feeling of he's away and he needs somebody to help him take care of his child. It's got that kind of feel that you see pretty often in historical fiction or historical fantasy. But again, there does seem to be a respect and care for each other, and especially the thing that unites them is their love for this little girl. His wife that he has married now also really, really cares for her, and she knows that he loved his previous wife that passed away. He knows the little girl, that was her mother, but she wants to be a mother figure to her. And you're like, oh, they're sweet. They're a nice family. And then, if you don't know anything about this particular story, you do have a plot line that involves children going missing. And this particular man, who is the father of this young girl, he's very, very, worried about something happening to her. And then he also desperately wants to do everything he can to bring back the missing children, especially given that he is not just a father himself, so he understands how that would feel, but also somewhat of this protector role within his culture and his society. And so this really, really weighs on him. And as you progress through the story, he is really worried about the fate of all of these individuals. He has this huge responsibility on his shoulders. So there's all those components. And then also, I don't think ever seen two characters where you have this setup between them where they're married, but they're not necessarily the kind of married couple you typically see in a story. And the way that they kind of grow to have their relationship deepen over the course of the story was really actually quite beautiful and like nothing I've seen before. I want to reiterate, same as when I was talking about, the character Isaac in Perdido Street Station, that this is not a story that is centered on these two characters falling in love. That's not necessarily the point of the book, but it's a piece of it. And I do feel like relationships and how they develop, and seeing relationships that are different from first loves, or seeing relationships that are different from the really intense passion that you get in fantasy romance or something like that. But seeing this kind of very different approach to how people come to care for one another, I really, really appreciated. And it's not just the romantic relationship, it's also how he has a relationship with his cousin who he cares very much about, or he has a relationship with this young man who he knew when they were children, and how they're kind of friends and there's this respect between them. There's kind of like this brotherly bond between them, but also sometimes they're such different people that sometimes they don't always see eye to eye on things, or how they would go about things is very different. So just seeing how an adult man interacts with other people, basically. Also, the woman that is his wife, she's such a lovely person. She cares so much about other human beings, other people. She just wants to do right by everybody, and she's really hardworking, and she's just a very calm presence in the story. So those two characters both, I really, really appreciated them. That's it, though, for some adult fantasy with some adult perspectives. As noted before, I've done this video a number of times, the style video. So if you're looking for more recommendations, I'll have the videos in the description bar. And if you'd like to give your own recommendations, feel free to do so in the comments. Don't worry about if I have potentially mentioned whatever book you're thinking of in previous videos. No problem whatsoever. It's fine if somebody sees it there or they see it in a previous video of mine. I'm just excited anytime any of you are willing to give recommendations, and then selfishly, maybe I'm looking for some myself. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.